But rather, I would have preferred to sort of engage that idea with asking him questions and sort of drawing out the ideas rather than saying to him, well, you're not valuable either. There's no reason why you shouldn't kill yourself.
Hey friends, it's Abdu Murray and with Embrace the Truth, and we're coming to you again with a short segment called Coulda Shoulda Woulda. There's a series of these where I and other people who speak for a living, who either do apologetics or evangelism or both, will share with you a story where we coulda, shoulda, or woulda done something differently, whether it's from the stage or during a Q&A or in our own personal conversations of evangelism or dealing with some issue that the Christian faith speaks to. We're not perfect. And we get a lot of times people saying, boy, I wish you were there when this had happened. And the reality is God's put you there and he has blessed you with that opportunity. And if you're prepared and you spend time in prayer about these opportunities, you're going to mess up, but you're also going to have tremendous victories. And that's true for all of us. And so for all the stories you hear about evangelists and apologists giving illustrations of the times when they've done it right, or they've asked the right question at the right time, that's because of trial and error. It's because we've actually gained the wisdom from doing it. And so even with that wisdom, we still mess up. So this is meant to encourage you to go in there and get in the game. And if you have some foibles, that's okay. And if you have some victories, praise God, but you're going to have both. And the victories will become sweeter and sweeter the more you reflect on what you coulda, shoulda, or woulda said in those times when you fumbled it. Well, joining me today is my good friend, Alan Shlemon. Alan and I go back years, many years actually. Yeah. This morning I was trying to think of the first time you and I met. I think it was either at an ETS, Evangelical Theological Society meeting, or it might have been at a conference on the insider movements, and it was in Lynchburg, Virginia, I think.
Oh, you're right.
Something like that. Or California. Yeah. No, it was California. It was in California, the first one. So anyway, it was one of those, and that was, back in the single digits of this current millennium.
That's right.
So that was a while back. But Alan is a speaker and a writer with Stand to Reason. Alan's got some wonderful resources. You need to check out str.org and Alan Shlemon, Shlemon. He's on podcasts. He does public speaking. He does things at universities, much of the same thing that we do, but he also really does a great job of equipping Christians in memorable ways so that the arguments that they learn and the facts they learn can be communicated in memorable ways. And he has two specializations. So Alan, before we get into the coulda, shoulda, or woulda, when you coulda, shoulda, woulda done something differently,
sure, there's
some things that you specialize in specifically. Now, you're a generalist like a lot of us, but you specialize in a couple of topics and you do it really well. Tell us about those.
Well, one of the topics that I specialize in, I'd say, is the topic of sexuality, specifically homosexuality and the current sort of debate over, transgender people and, all the implications associated with that. So I do a lot of speaking on that. I'm always invited to speak on that subject. Mm-hmm. The other one would be probably Islam, actually. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't say I'm like a scholar in Islam at all, but definitely I am invited to teach a lot on sort of practical tactics of engaging Muslims, especially with the gospel. And then probably the other one would be all the bioethics related topics like abortion, stem cell research, and cloning. So those are the three things that I get invited to teach on a lot.
So nothing controversial, just the run of the stuff.
That's right. Yeah. Everybody agrees with me, so it's a real encouraging time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, someone's got to do it. I'm glad you're doing it. Right. Well, so Alan, share with us a story of when you coulda, shoulda, or woulda done it differently, and then what lesson you learned after that.
Yeah, so I was invited to speak, not speak formally, but I was invited to come to a pro-life outreach that was being done at a university. So this pro-life organization had set up some stands and some tables on the center of a university campus. And of course, students were engaging all these people there. And so they invited me to come also and just kind of hang around in the crowd and engage people in conversation about abortion. And so I was talking to this guy. He was an abortion choice advocate, so he supported the right to have an abortion. And I asked him, well, what is his reasoning? What's his arguments for why abortion should be morally permissible? And he explained to me in rather simple terms. He said, look, he goes, I'm an atheist. He goes, I believe that the way we humans came about is through an evolutionary process. And he said, as a result of that evolutionary process, there's no reason why any one of us would be, as a human being more valuable than other species. So there's no reason why, we couldn't say kill the unborn, because the unborn isn't valuable for any reason. There's no God who makes the unborn valuable. So it was a pretty standard kind of case being made from the perspective of an atheist. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, I'm going to be clever. I'm going to show him the logical absurdity of his view, which at Standard Reason we call this taking the roof off, but it's basically the tactic called reductio ad absurdum, which means you take their view and you follow their view to its logical conclusion to show that it leads to something ridiculous. So I said back to him, I said, okay, well, if abortion is morally permissible because we're not, human beings aren't valuable, I said, well, then there's no reason why you're valuable either. In fact, you should probably just go ahead and kill yourself because you're not valuable. And I thought, oh, I got him there, right? And so he looks at me and he goes, and his countenance completely changed from this very confident person to a very kind of forlorn look. And he said, you know what? He says, you're right. He said, I've actually thought about killing myself. And I'm
my goodness.
What? He goes, yeah. He goes, the fact that you mentioned this right now makes me think that, it's probably really the case that we aren't valuable. And I've wondered why I would have any value either. And all of a sudden he started getting super depressed. And I thought, wait, what's going on here? And so I started to backtrack that. I'm like, well, no. I'm not saying you're not valuable. I actually believe you're valuable. But, and so I find myself all very nervous about his condition. So actually I ended up, just to jump to a fast forward here, I ended up actually taking down his phone number and calling him over a period of about 6 or so months afterwards, just to connect with him and to make sure that I wasn't trying to push him over the edge with anything like that,
Yeah.
But anyways, all that being said, that was I felt like a mistake in terms of the way I handled that. I do think there's value to showing the absurdity of someone's view, but I wish had I had a chance to do it all over, I wouldn't have come across in such a sort of direct and forceful way, but rather I would have preferred to sort of engage that idea with asking him questions and sort of drawing out the ideas rather than saying to him, well, you're not valuable either. There's no reason why you shouldn't kill yourself. I thought to myself, what am I doing? So anyways, that was a scenario.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you a follow-up question then. Had you to do it over again, and he basically came to that conclusion essentially beforehand, is that human beings are no more valuable than other species, and we could abort babies because why not? Had you wanted to do a reductio ad absurdum, help us sort of get started with that. You don't have to finish the whole thing, because obviously conversations are organic things. People always have that. Here's the step, and I would have said this, and he would have said this, and then would have this, and then. But they're not always chess matches. They're
sure.
They're organic things, and people say things like he said. It's very surprising, and suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with this. This is no longer about abortion. This is about this guy's own self-image or self-esteem.
Right.
But had you been able to get him started, how would you have nudged it in that direction? Give us some examples of some things that you would have said in response other than what you said.
Yeah, well, the main thing I would have changed was I would have asked him questions about it, not necessarily just make direct statements and say, oh, well, you're not valuable. So, but one of the questions I simply asked would be something like, well, if an unborn human being is not valuable because we're just a product of evolution, then why is anyone valuable? Why do we even have laws against murder or killing right now, as it is for anybody, even a born person? Because simply because they're unborn or born doesn't going to make any difference, according to your view. So I would have probably started with something like that, where I'm just asking him questions and asking him to sort of explore what consequences arise from his view.
Yeah.
And so, I would have just been more charitable and kind and ask questions that way, rather than turn to him and say, well, you should then maybe kill yourself because you're not valuable,
Right.
I was kind of going more for the way like Albert Camus or these,
right.
The people who existentialists would be saying, well, why is anything valuable at all? Let's just all die and nothing matters. So I wouldn't have been so harsh not knowing him at all because he was a complete stranger to me. So that to me was the big mistake is I now take similar conversations with a lot more care. I certainly don't try to say things like, oh, you should kill yourself,
Yeah.
But it would be more about just asking questions and slowly building that up. But I think too often my tendency is to think, I don't have a lot of time with this person. I need to get right to the main final point instead of saying, you know what, I should just take some time to unpack this and have a conversation, recognizing this is a valuable human being. I mean, so what? He's an atheist, I mean, that's he's still a valuable human being made in God's image, and I should care for him in his soul in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's one of the hallmarks of good apologetics is not answering questions but answering people, and that's one of the things that we try to do at Embrace the Truth is as well, and even we will mess that up. And this is probably not the first encounter you've had where that issue came up and you have done it differently before. And it's one particular instance where it happens. I remember not quite as drastic, but nonetheless damaging in something I said. And it was from the stage. I was actually part of a week-long symposium on Christianity and ethics, and certainly social and bioethics as well. And I was giving a talk on abortion and life, and what makes life valuable, the beginning of it and the end of it, and all these things. And I got to the abortion section, and I basically made this statement. And what I was trying to show was that it all comes down to one question. You guys at Stand to Reason are always masterful at this. It comes down to what is the unborn? Mm-hmm. And if it's a innocent human person, then you can't end his or her life for unjustified reasons, or for reasons that don't comport with outside life of the mother and these kind of things. So I wanted to basically make the statement. This is actually comes down to one question. And so instead of saying that, what I said was, abortion's actually not complex. They want to make it complex, and it's always a complex. It's not complex. It comes down to one thing. Mm-hmm. And I proceeded to talk about it's the one question. A person came up to me, a Christian person, by the way, had come up to me, and I don't know if she'd had an abortion or if she knew someone who was dear to her who'd had an abortion, and had a very serious sort of a pathos behind the way she was speaking. And she said, you made a statement that I don't agree with. And I said, well, I'm happy to talk to you about that. What is it? And she said, you said it was simple. I can guarantee you not one woman I've ever met who's made a decision to have an abortion thought it was simple. And my point wasn't that it's a simple experience. My point was the issue comes down to one thing. But in my zeal to make such a strong, emphatic point, with the 35 minutes I had on an extraordinarily incendiary topic, was to be simple and direct. Just like that's why I thought of it the minute you started talking about the story. And I suddenly realized she's right. The person behind the issue is the thing. And, one of the things we say at Embrace the Truth now, having learned from that experience, is that we're not in the question answering business. I don't answer questions. And I don't think you do either, Alan. None of us are supposed to. We answer people. Because questions and issues don't need answers, but people do, and they use the questions and the issues to get those. And so in reducing an issue down to one question, I gave the impression that the people who go through it are reduced down to one simple decision. And I think it is a straightforward issue. I think it is, what is the unborn? There's a lot to unpack there. But I had learned from that particular experience is that there are times when you have to be cognizant of who you're speaking to and what baggage they bring, and we flub it. So had I to speak over on that again, I think I would get to the one question issue, but I wouldn't do it so cavalierly. So,
it's interesting because I've actually said I've made the same exact mistake on exactly the same point you just mentioned. And now the way I try to, if I'm going to make this point about the simplicity of that, what is the unborn, I will often say, abortion is often psychologically or emotionally complex for a woman who's facing a crisis pregnancy or whatever. But I say, but morally speaking, it's simple. So it might be psychologically or emotionally complex. Morally speaking, it's simple. And the question is, what is the unborn? And I make that distinction that you make. So sometimes I try to separate those two things. The psychological, emotional complexity that a woman who's facing a crisis pregnancy might be facing versus the moral question, what is the unborn? If it's a human being, you can't kill it. If it's not a human being, then of course you can.
Well, that's great advice, and that's advice born of the trial and error of being in the game. Friends, that's the point of coulda, shoulda, woulda, is that we look back and we say we coulda, shoulda, or woulda done it differently, and then in the future, when we have that encounter again, we can, should, and then did actually do it differently. So if you find yourself in that kind of a position, take the advice that Alan has offered to us, that as born of doing it and making mistakes, but doing it right as well. And the Lord can also use these things in tremendous ways, even with our mistakes. So don't be afraid to make the mistakes, but also don't be afraid to rehash them so that you can learn from those as well. So Alan, great talking with you, man. Thanks for sharing us with the advice that you've given to us and being on Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda.
My pleasure. Good to see you.
You too. Everyone, take care. Until next time.